Let's say you run a business. Quick question. Is it helpful to measure stuff to help you run that business? You could measure stuff. You could identify goals, measure progress, identify trends, make predictions. You could do all these things. But it's a lot of work. And you're a good guesser. You probably have good instincts, probably have good intuition. It's maybe best that you just guess, right? No, terrible idea. Terrible idea. And you don't want to do that for your Intuiface projects either. You want to measure things. You want to identify what's working and what's not working. You want to identify trends. You want to learn things about your audience, helping make sure you're achieving the goals of that deployment, interpreting how your target audience thinks, making adjustments to those projects. You've got to measure stuff. The question is, measure what? And that's a problem because there's an infinite number of things you probably could measure, and you do need to be careful. For example, you ever hear that expression, correlation doesn't mean causation? I'll give you a quick example. You're at a store, and in the winter, it's cold outside. All of a sudden, business goes up. Does that mean that cold makes people want to buy stuff? It might. Or maybe it's because, well, there's Christmas, there's Hanukkah, there's Kwanzaa, and there's reasons for buying things, right? So just because two things happen at the same time doesn't mean one causes the other. You kind of, big picture, need to be precise. You need to really understand what it is you're measuring, what it is you're trying to figure out. If I have the same retail business, I have a kiosk, and nobody buys product X. Nobody's ever buying product X. Does it mean that nobody wants product X? Or does it mean we do a bad job of presenting Project X? Is it in the wrong place? Is it right? There's all these possible reasons for it not selling. So you really need to make sure you're being precise and specific and measuring the right stuff. So here's what we're going to do in the rest of this video. I'm going to share with you a little bit of advice about the types of things you should be measuring. Maybe every project would need to be focusing on these three particular things. And the first is average dwell time. Average dwell time, the average amount of time a user is standing at that kiosk and using it. You could measure it per experience across all devices. You could measure it at the device level. Each device has its own unique dwell time, which might be the case. It could be that what you're doing on that kiosk is more interesting in one part of the store than in another, right? You could measure it on average across an hour, a day, a week, a month, by location. What you're identifying is the level of stickiness of that kiosk, of that interactive content. How much do people enjoy using it, want to use it, are motivated to use it? Are they on it for 10 seconds on average? Are they on it for 2 minutes on average? My advice is you want to kind of figure out what the average time might be. For example, you run a pilot, you have staff, or you actually allow the public to use it and see what is the typical time. And then over time at different locations, as you change things, see how that changes as well. You're going to ultimately identify on a experience basis, on a scene by scene basis, how sticky that content is. It's going to tell you, is it effective? Is it doing the job? Are people using it the way we intend them to be used? One of the ways you could take advantage of that information is A/B testing. Some of you might know A/B testing, where you change one variable. And for some people, the variable is set to value 1, and for other people, the variable is set to value 2. You're just changing that one variable, and you're going to see, does that affect dwell time? Does it affect lots of possible things, I guess? But this dwell time is really a great way of zeroing in on that stickiness to see if the content is really drawing people in and encouraging them to complete whatever the scenario is, whatever the goal is of that deployment. The second metric is session count. Very simple idea. The dwell time, the average dwell time, is how long people are standing there. The session count is how many people. You could have somebody standing there and ticking boxes and counting every time somebody stands there, but that's nuts. But you do want to know how often it's being used. And again, is that usage based on various contexts? Does usage depend on location? on the time of day, on the weather outside, on the store location. You get the idea. I suppose there's an infinite number of contexts as well, and you need to decide which ones are potentially relevant and need to be followed. But whatever that is, you need to think about how many people, and you measure that based on sessions. A lot of you are familiar with the notion of session from the web. When anybody visits a particular URL, companies like Google can measure, well, when did they first visit the page and when did they leave it? So it's kind of pretty clear. Everybody's device has a unique ID. My PC has a unique ID. My phone, my tablet, they have unique IDs. So Google can differentiate each individual visitor and measure how long their session was, how long they were there. With Intuiface, it's trickier. I mean, it's all at the same screen, right? And if you don't have a camera, look, if you have computer vision, you could actually determine when it's a new person. But a lot of you don't have that, of course. So one screen, multiple people. How do you measure sessions? Well, there's a variety of ways you can do it. The obvious one is a sort of a start button, right, where you begin the session. And then typically the scenario ends on some last choice made by the user that ends the session. So there's an explicit start and stop, and that's the session. Maybe if it times out, nobody's used it for a while. Well, now we know the session ended and we can begin counting a new session. So there are some things you need to do, but you have to be creative. But at the end of the day, how many people are using this kiosk over a given period of time based on a variety of contexts? You're going to want to know that information. So we talked about dwell time. We talked about session count. The last is key performance indicators, identifying the goals of your project and figuring out what do we need to measure to determine whether or not we're fulfilling those goals. Not easy to do. You're going to want all the stakeholders together. You want to think long and hard about what exactly it is we're hoping to achieve with this deployment, and then sit down with that group and say, okay, what measures will help us understand if we're fulfilling that goal? There's over 20 different chart types in Intuiface. You have lots of flexibility there. Maybe you start with KPIs, key performance indicators. They're really simple. Maybe you just have a single value and you just track that single value and it's pointing you in the direction of whether or not the goal is being fulfilled. But this notion of identifying key performance indicators will vary from deployment to deployment. It's going to be unique for every single project. There's no hard and fast rule about what it is. It just needs to be meaningful and actionable. Okay? Not just that you can measure it, but that you know what to do in reaction to that measure. You can take action based on the value. Just to measure for the heck of measuring is pointless, and there's no reason to do that. So give it some really good thought. You're going to benefit from this greatly. So please try these out. I'm sorry to tell you, your intuition stinks. I promise you. Give analytics a shot.